Hey, Bob. So guess what? It's another episode of Let's Chat Sales.
No way. Let's chat sales.
Yes, exactly. It is. And today we're talking about how life can get in the way, right?
Yes.
You've got this sales effort. You'll hear me talk about all the time about how important it is to have a regular routine, that you should be working on your sales process every day and should have a certain routine and have everything in place. But sometimes things get in the way, right?
Yeah, I was going to say, if I can make a confession, I've got a sales process I've just put together in the last 6-7 days, and it works really well on the days that I am committed to doing it. But today, I had some things that came up, some personal things, and I'm completely off track with it. And so it seemed like it might be a good topic for us to just talk through, because part of what I do is I beat myself up about it. I blame myself. I get more frustrated. And what I've seen in the past is that causes me not to want to follow that the next day and the day after. It's like I abandon it the first day it goes south. Does that make sense?
Yep. Yeah. This whole thing about having a habit, about having a process and doing something every day, and just because it keeps the momentum going and so forth. This is the Seinfeld method, which is, his deal was to write a joke every day. Every day he writes a joke. He's got a calendar and he crosses off that day in the calendar when he's written that joke. And so the key is to try and keep the streak alive. But there are times when you can't, right? Stuff get in the way. I'm in the process of a bit of a transition myself. And so it is a bit of a battle to try and keep the momentum going.
So what are some of the things you do, Brendan, to keep that momentum going? Because you do a lot more sales than me. So what are the tricks and tips that you would offer us?
I have a few things that come to mind, but two things in particular. One is to try and block out a certain amount of time. And what I do in my calendar is my mornings are the best time for sales. It's when I'm most creative. It's when I've got my most energy. And so I tend to block out the morning to do work. And then I try and block out 30, 45 minutes for dedicated sales sorts of activities every day.
Okay.
And that doesn't sound like a lot, but the idea is it's not a huge insurmountable amount of time. And once I get into the mode, once I get started, it's easy for it to creep into the following next half hour or 45 minutes or whatever. And so pretty soon I've dedicated a fair amount of time. But I start with a small chunk at the beginning of the day.
So this is like the runner who they say, if you don't want to run, just put your shoes on and your shorts and just go out and say you're going to run for 5 minutes. And before you know it, you've run an hour.
Yeah. Okay. And that's the second, and that's the kind of related piece is start with a small chunk. Start with a very small increment and use that as the catalyst, as the impetus to get started. So you block out time in your calendar so you can't have something else going on, number one. And number two, start with some meaningful chunk and then let that creep in. Take a break, and then try another chunk, right?
Yep.
Those things really help. And so even if you're just talking 1 or 2 customers every day, or you're just sending out 3 or 4 emails just to keep the momentum going, that's a good way. Ideally, you want to do more, but if you've got stuff going on, if you've got conflicts and you've got your work wrestling with life, this is a way to kind of keep some amount of momentum going and keep your hand in.
Okay. Can I add one thing that's worked for me various times in my career? And that is to
fire away.
Call a friend or a good customer to start my day. Before I start making sales calls, talking to someone who really likes what I do and is very positive about me and just gets me in that place where it's like, okay, I'm much more impenetrable than I would be if I just started making sales calls. So really building that armor, if you will.
Yeah, that's good. It's another way to get the momentum going. The converse of that is, I think, an old Mark Twain thing is like,
you are name dropping left and right today.
I know. So I think it's Mark Twain who says, eat the frog, right?
Yep.
Which is that right?
Yes, you are correct.
You start by tackling the most miserable, hardest part of the project first. So if you've got an unruly customer, if you can get them out of the way, if you got a tough sales call or a tough issue to work through, then try and tackle that first. If you can tackle that, again, take 10 minutes, take a little chunk of it, but tackle that first, then you get that out of the way, and that sort of makes the rest of the day go kind of easily.
I use that with my exercise. I try to exercise at 5 or 5:30 in the morning. That way it's not hanging over my head all day.
Yeah.
And I can feel success right out of like, I've already got the hardest part of my day done. Now I can do anything.
Yeah. A lot of this is we're talking about routine and having structure. And, I had kids, they're now adults now, but one of the things about kids, like everyone, we like to have a certain amount of structure. And if you have a routine that you're in, and this is going back to blocking your time, it sort of kind of it's almost like putting your life on autopilot, putting your day on autopilot a little bit. So if you have a bit of a routine and you know that from 8 o'clock in the morning to 10, you're going to be doing these sorts of things, you've got this amount of time blocked out, those sorts of routines, that sort of structure, it makes it easy. It makes it easier. And so you sort of have a bit of a flywheel effect. I find that helpful.
Can I push back on that a little bit?
Sure.
So many of the founders and owners I've talked to like the fact that they don't have to work within a structure. That's one of the appeals of what they're doing. They worked in a full-time job and they had to be there at 8 o'clock and they had to do all those things. Now they have the opportunity to build it however they want. And I hear a lot of I don't want structure. Structure is a negative. What do you say to that?
Yeah. To each his own, I think. But like in my coaching sessions, I have a pretty rigorous kind of structure that I've put into place. And we're going to talk about pipeline once a week, and we're going to go through the pipeline, and we're going to go through the opportunities. We're going to look for patterns. We're going to discuss obstacles. And these are sort of standard things that they can come to expect every week in that status call. And then what I expect them to do is block out time every day for sales. These are startup companies. They've got other things going on, product development, marketing, finance, raising money, that sort of thing. But I expect them to spend some amount of time every day. If you're an early stage startup, you're working. So, it's probably best that you have some amount of structure. Yeah. So it's nice that you have the ability to kind of move things around, and if you want to take the day off, if you're self-employed, you can do that. There's nothing wrong with that. And that kind of gets to my next point, which is give yourself permission to let life kind of interfere on your business, right? I mean, working for the sake of work in and of itself isn't the greatest thing in the world. So it does make sense. And you should give yourself permission to go and live life. And if you got stuff coming in from the outside that you've got to tackle, and you've got to put something on hold for a second, do your priorities, figure out what you can put aside, and then, tackle those life things you got to get out of the way. And when you have to get them out of the way.
It's a lot of time shifting, really. And saying, okay, on Thursday, I'm going to the doctor for the morning, so I might work Saturday morning or Sunday afternoon. I keep a little clock of how many hours I've worked. And if I'm doing personal stuff for 4 or 5 hours, I make sure that I build that time in an evening or on the weekends. So at the end of the week, I've still accomplished the same amount of stuff.
Right. And we've talked about this in past podcast episodes about being able to say no and having that ability to say no. And that, I find that's really hard for me to do. If someone asks me something, their new project comes along, I always say yes. And so
Brendan.
I've
never experienced
this. It really helps. It really helps to be able to have someone to be able to say no, or have someone that you can bounce ideas off of who can tell you, hey, maybe this is something you want to put off until later.
Right.
I don't always listen, but it's good to have that feedback.
Well, I think that's the hard part, because especially when you're starting a business, you don't want to say no to that customer who says, hey, can you do this thing for me? Because you're going, I can make money, I can do this. This would be a really good customer to have, except it's going to take you in a completely different direction. And I think that's a tug of war. But as I think of the businesses that are most successful, they really stay in their lane. They don't deviate. Yeah. And I've got a client who's really good at he'll say, hey, this person wants me to do this. What do you think? And I'll say, doesn't really feel like your core mission. And he'll be like, yeah, that's what I was thinking. I'm going to tell him no. And it's hard to do in the beginning, though.
Yeah, it does definitely take effort. And if you're like me, you want to take on stuff. Oh, new project. Oh, that sounds really sexy. Oh, that's really interesting. I want to do it. But then, something has to give. And so it's good to be able to bounce those ideas off on other people. It's good to be able to step back and maybe take a little quiet time and go, what are the things that really matter? What are the priorities? And then make that tough decision. And if there's some life event, as we talked about, that gets in the way, and you got to tackle that, well, then you got to tackle it and then give yourself permission. So those are the things I would say is try and block out time, even small amounts, so you get that routine going. Give yourself permission to take time off. Have resources, friends around that you can bounce ideas off of and get an outside perspective, someone who can kind of point out what may be a blind spot for you. Try to be able to say no. I think those are the things I would say that I would kind of focus on.
I would give the one caveat, and that's, Brendan, I've seen a couple of people in the past who've always found excuses when it's time to do sales calls, that there's always something that rises above it. Oh, I've got to go pay bills. Oh, I've got to do this. So if you start seeing that pattern, that's not what we're talking about here. That's
Right.
not what we're
Right.
talking about at all. That's
Right.
avoidance. And we're not saying avoid it. We're saying
Yeah.
put it in perspective given what else might be going on.
Right. That brings up the course just real quickly, and the sales course that I've just recently launched. The point of which is to kind of create that momentum. So a big part of it is how do you get in the habit of talking about sales and doing sales every day, executing every day, every day, every day. And it just 20, 30 minutes a day can make a huge difference, because if you're a founder, if you're a creator, if you're in a startup, having that momentum, getting that momentum is critically important. And so this kind of gets to that. There are moments in life when you got to take a break. You don't want to burn out. You got to focus on your life. By all means, do that. But at the same time, when it's time to get back to the work, get back in that habit. So
I think in
how's that?
addition to momentum, you also get the habit, and it becomes a habit. If every morning from 8 to 9 you're doing
Yep.
this, your
Yep.
body and your mind start to get attuned to it.
Yep.
And I find that can really make a difference too with things.
Exactly. Yep. Yep. It's getting into that routine.
All right. Well, Brandon,
doing
this has been really
podcasts every
helpful
week.
to me.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Bob. I think we should do it again sometime, don't you?
All right. Let's chat sales again.
All right. See you, Bob.
See ya.
Until next time.
Okay, that was another episode of Let's Chat Sales, a quick one, of course, and I hope it was helpful. And if it was, please like and subscribe, and more importantly, share it with your friends. There should be something right here you could point to and click on and try that out. It should be good. It's probably good. Certainly short. It's probably helpful. And thanks for listening or watching.